All right. Well, it is straight up 12 o'clock, and so we'll go ahead and begin our first class in the Introduction to Neighboring 101. I mentioned earlier we have about 74 people registered for this class, people from all across the United States, Virginia and New York and Ohio, Oklahoma, many from Missouri. They want to learn more about the neighboring movement and what that means exactly. We'll be meeting once a month. The classes are always free, and if you have to miss a session, we will get a recording of the session out to you. Uh, I'll be sharing information and links in the chat as well. You may feel like today that you're drinking from a fire hydrant or a fireman's hose, and I assure you, I still feel that way about this topic myself. But hang in there. I think it'll be. I hope everyone at the end of the day can say they benefited from the program. So again, welcome to the Introduction to Neighboring 101. Um, this is going to be an ongoing series of free classes and discussions that are designed to educate people on the power of neighboring, to showcase examples of the neighboring movement across North America, to look at research on this topic, and hopefully to motivate individuals and groups to pursue neighboring for the improvement of their communities, their neighborhoods, and for their own quality of life. We now recognize that active neighboring can make communities vibrant and welcoming places to live, work, and play. Our sessions, kind of depending on the discussion that takes place, will run from between 30 minutes to 1 hour. Most of the video interviews I'll be sharing that have been done in advance for the class run 20 to 30 minutes. We have a lot of people signed up today, as I mentioned, and the advantage, I think, to being on live is that you get to ask questions that may be answered today, or maybe it's a question that I need to research and we need to work on to be able to do a future session on to really answer. But these classes are also going to be recorded, as I mentioned. If you do have to miss the live class, we will get those links to you if you are, in fact, registered for the class. Feel free to use the chat function to share your ideas and to comment on ideas of others or to ask questions throughout the class. As I give just a brief introduction on today's neighboring example, would you please share in chat where you're from and why you are interested in this topic of neighboring? This will help guide maybe some future discussions as well. But where you're from and why you are interested in the topic of neighboring. So hello, my name is David Burton. I am the facilitator instructor for Neighboring 101. I am the community development specialist for University of Missouri Extension, and I am headquartered in Greene County, which is specifically Springfield, Missouri. So I was introduced to this idea of neighboring about 2 years ago when I read a book thinking that I was already the very best neighbor that anyone could hope to have. And I finished the book realizing that I was falling way short. Um, sometimes books have a way of doing that to you. They highlight something that is wrong that you didn't even know was wrong in the first place. And as I began to take steps to get better at neighboring, making efforts to engage with my neighbors, and reading more about neighboring concepts and looking at research and what others were doing around the country with neighboring. As I did that, I realized that I really was falling short myself. But I also realized that neighboring was a great fit for my work as a community development specialist. I discovered that neighboring also had benefits for me personally and my neighborhood and my community. And as I've done prospecting, is kind of what my wife and I have started to call it, as we do prospecting in our neighborhood, we have discovered gold mines of talent, made new friends, and been able to help others living right here next to us. Neighboring is also a great way to engage people in efforts to make where they live safe, clean, and friendly. Three things that rise to the top of any survey about what is important in the neighborhood. safe, clean, and friendly. So I'll be sharing in chat. I shared at the very beginning some links to resources I have online, including links to a great practical chart we have titled "Who is My Neighbor?" And in sharing that, I want to acknowledge Dave Runyon. He is the author of The Art of Neighboring. We'll hear from Dave on a later session, but I want to share at the beginning that he wrote a very practical book, The Art of Neighboring, and it explains the importance of neighboring from his perspective, but it also presents this practical tool for learning and remembering the names of your neighbors. Depending on the study that you look at across America, only 20% or 13%, or maybe as low as 3% of Americans know their neighbors. One of the keys to that relationship is learning and using a person's name. Now, this chart is actually a key resource in any neighboring movement, and I've shared the link. I don't know if that'll show up very well since it's on white paper. I have shared the link on the page where you can download a version of this "Who is My Neighbor" chart. Um, I think the chart will be of interest to you. And now, if you would, since we've already shared a little bit in chat, I'm seeing some interesting backgrounds. That is wonderful. I do want to ask you to weigh in on one poll since we're talking about knowing our neighbors. Um, how many of your immediate adjoining neighbors, and these are sometimes defined as the 8 closest front doors to you, that could be in an apartment complex or a subdivision. And how many of those homes do you know the names of your immediate neighbors? Now, this is anonymous, and don't feel bad. When I originally took that, I only knew 2 of my 8 adjoining neighbors by name. The rest of them were, "Hey, you know how we do that sometimes." All right. Well, some of you that are on this session today are apparently already active in neighboring and wanting to learn more about it. So some of you really rank toward the high end of this chart, as you can uh, see. Let's see. Am I sharing the results? There, I'm sharing the results with you. I think um, some of you rank toward the top. So you're already maybe interested in neighboring and maybe have been doing some of this already. So that is a great start. And uh, I think it says something about this group already about where you're kind of at on this topic. So the goal of these Zoom sessions is to develop a core group of engaged neighbors or connectors across Missouri or beyond that will carry on this work and help to educate others about the importance of being an engaged neighbor. Uh, the project that we're going to be highlighting today is actually out of Midland, Michigan. It's called the Midland Neighboring Project. The project was started by Wally Mayton. Wally is an associate pastor at Memorial Presbyterian Church in Midland, Michigan. He was not able to be on the interview, but 2 other key leaders in that program and in helping to keep the program going now for a number of years are on this interview with me. One of them being Mayor Maureen Donker, who encouraged civic leaders to find a common goal of asking neighbors to move beyond just acquaintance to the creation of real caring relationships to help make Midland a welcoming community. Uh, the Midland Neighboring Project, they describe themselves as this way, sort of their vision mission statement. As community faith leaders and community advocates, we encourage friends to 1, learn the names of all their neighbors, 2, to build relationships with their neighbors through common interest and shared experiences, and 3, to sustain compassion and caring practices of neighboring. As a great summary, I think, a great um, um, mission statement. Well, without further ado, here I'm going to kick off our interview with uh, Maureen and Alicia and about the Midland Neighboring Project. Thank you for being here and Please, as we go, feel free to make
Well,
comments and chat.
thank you for visiting with me today about neighboring in Midland, Michigan. I've perused the website in Midland. It looks like a beautiful place to live. Great industry of things that city can really be proud of. And those are things that maybe other researchers, people would be interested in. But for me, I'm interested in neighboring. And Dave Runyon, the author of The Art of Neighboring, said, if you want to learn more about neighboring, visit Midland, Michigan. And I'm not visiting in person, but by Zoom to hear about those who are really making that possible. And so I'll let each of you kind of maybe introduce yourself, and then we can talk a little bit about the history of how this neighboring movement got started in Midland. Is that okay? Mayor, how long have you been mayor? And a little bit, just maybe a little intro on you.
Sure. I'm Maureen Donker, and I'm the mayor for the city of Midland, and I've been mayor since 2009. I've been on council since 2007, but I've had the opportunity to serve as mayor since 2009.
Okay, it's a pretty long tenure.
Pretty long. It's been good. It's all good.
Good. And Alyssa, that's correct, I think, with the City of Midland or Midland Foundation?
Yeah, so my name is Alicia, and I work at the Midland Area Community Foundation. And so I work in the community impact team here, which is why Neighboring Week is a strong part of my heart, and just really the work that we're doing in our community, specifically through that community impact piece, has been very wonderful.
You mentioned Neighboring Week. I hadn't picked up. When do you do your Neighboring Week? Is that a spring thing or a fall event? Or
very interesting that you reached out when you did. I just would assume you would have known that because of how timely your email was. It was September 28th through October 4th of this year.
Okay.
Yeah. Is it World Neighboring Day, Maureen?
That's National Neighboring Day.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, good. Well, some communities do something in March revolving around Mr. Rogers' birthday. And that's the one that's kind of on radar now. And so that's why I thought of that. But yeah, that's a great timing for that then. Perfect. So what's kind of the history, I guess, of the neighboring movement in Midland? How did this get started?
Well, it's somewhat like your story. You said you had a sister-in-law in Colorado, or sister-in-law?
Yes.
So there was a woman here in Midland. Her name is Linda Owen, and she was visiting her sister in Colorado. And she actually attended church there, and they were in the process of their neighboring program. So she came back to Midland and mentioned, thought that there was really a wonderful thing, and mentioned it to our city manager, who then talked to me about it. And he said, hey, this is something for the mayor, is what he said, something like that. And so I looked up, where in Colorado she was, and I called the mayor's office in Colorado just to talk with them about it and what they did. And so they told me about the program, and I thanked them, and they gave me Dave Runyon's name and contact information, and I thanked him. And then I met, actually, and I thought, oh my gosh, this was so beautiful and simple. It was beautiful and simple, that process that they engaged in. Because it was something that the churches were doing in Colorado. And we have a very active faith-based community here in Midland, but who wanted to engage, outside of their congregation. So I spoke with a local minister, Wally Mayton, who's very popular here in Midland and very engaged in the community. He said, do you think we could do this? And so we chatted about it. And we brought some other folks from the faith-based community together to say, would you be interested in that? And then we got serious. Then we really got serious, because there was an interest in that. And so we contacted Dave and said, hey, would you be willing to come here to Midland and tell us about, what your church is doing? So we are, so that's what we did. So I sent out an invitation to churches and asked them to come, which the mayor had never invited the faith-based community to come together before, and said, listen, I want to talk to you today, not about how to grow your congregation, but how you can help us, what role you can play in strengthening our community and helping us create a more welcoming place. And I have here someone who has done that successfully in their community, and I'm hoping that you will listen to it to see if you'd be interested in doing that. So Dave, told us about what they had done. The faith-based community said, yay, we will take that on, and a group of them signed on. And so they created was our first kind of Midland Neighboring Program. And that's how it started. It was widely accepted, certainly through the faith-based community, and it created quite a buzz actually in the community. People were very excited about it. And that was really a very, I would say, active and vibrant program for about 3 years. And then it began to kind of wane a little bit, I would say. And we know that belonging, that relationships and belonging are one of the strongest indicators of well-being in a community. We thought if we could be more welcoming, not that we weren't welcoming, but if we could do it even better, we would have a place where people wanted to live and businesses would want to locate to be in. So we continued then to say, how do we build off of this existing program then that was started by the faith-based community? And we did that really through our cultural awareness committee. So back in 2017, we had a flood. And one of the things that we saw out in that was that people said, you know what? I really met my neighbors down the street who I didn't know before. And so after that, we said, you know what, if there is something good that can come out of something that is not so good. So we then found out that, National Neighboring Day was the 28th. And we said, let's celebrate neighboring that week. Let's see what we can do to celebrate neighboring that week. And so that's what we did. We kind of came together and said, what can we do? How do we encourage people to get to know their neighbors better? And how can we make, lemonade out of some lemons that were given to us? So Alicia, what are you?
That is a fascinating parallel, because in Colorado, it was the mayor that brought up the idea to the ministerial alliance and said, you just need to teach your members to be better neighbors. That kind of initiated that. And then here in Midland, kind of the same thing, the mayor taking the initiative with the faith-based community. Very parallel tracks there. But you're right that it kind of has a life cycle, it seems like a lot of times, in 3 years.
It does. And so really we've been working on how do we keep that alive. And I think that I think that this year, based on what occurred this year, it's been really very exciting for us.
I assume the faith-based community still plays an active role in the neighboring Midland. Is the local government, or maybe the community foundation, something of kind of the guiding entity that kind of keeps everybody together on it?
Because government can't do everything. It's all about partnerships and working together. So this is a wonderful collaboration between the faith-based community, I would say, and and the rest of the community itself, really spearheaded through our cultural awareness committee, which is a group that's really directed through our community foundation, because we wanted a place where it could be held, which our community foundation is the perfect spot for that, because it represents everyone, no matter what faith you are, and or if you have no faith, so how, because we all strive for those wonderful for relationships in our lives and for that sense of belonging, which is so important. And especially
so, Alicia,
now, I think when communities, also are addressing the issue of, inclusion. How can we be a more inclusive space, the kind of place, where everyone wants to live and will thrive?
Yeah, and getting to know your neighbors, it can certainly play into that, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, Alicia has been wonderful, coordinating this group. She's been wonderful coordinating it. So I'm going to be quiet and let Alicia talk.
Yeah, Alicia, we want to hear a little bit about the coordination and some of your efforts and what you're seeing, maybe even as impacts out of all this work?
Yeah, sure. So as Maureen mentioned, we do have a very active community-based cultural awareness coalition, and it really only exists because there are a large group of community members who are like-minded in the sense of bringing about a true felt sense of inclusion for all people in our community. And Maureen has been a part of that coalition for a long time, which is very helpful because she brings such a broad spectrum of knowledge, specifically in regards to this conversation in Neighboring Week. And so as our coalition is really continuing to look at building inclusivity within our community and like really building inclusivity and a felt sense of that for all people, we started to kind of toy with, it makes sense that we would take an active role in not planning, not doing, not facilitating Neighboring Week, but coming alongside of Neighboring Week and really making it an effort that no one necessarily has ownership of, because neighboring shouldn't have parameters, it shouldn't have boundaries, and it really doesn't. And so we talked as a small committee, Maureen being a part of that actively, about like truly bringing the sense and spirit of neighboring to a broad spectrum within Midland County. We have 80,000 people, just over 80,000 people that live here. And how are we being intentional in building inclusion? And Neighboring Week just felt like such a wonderful fit. So the coalition really, I think, took a stance that the more we can be a connector, the more we can be an informer and an educator to all of this, the better. And so we facilitated, I would call them like open forums, open focus groups around Neighboring Week as we were prepping and getting people ready for 2020's Neighboring Week. And we did it all virtually, Zoom calls to where we brought our community nonprofits and businesses and people together to talk about like, what's important for Neighboring Week to you, or what is it to you? And we got this like community dialogue happening where natural connections came out of that. It was a really awesome opportunity to see a school district saying, we're gonna make neighboring cards, but then have another entity say, we need some of those cards at our assisted living homes. And then they had that coordination of neighboring. And I think one of the things that we did this year that we all as a coalition really determined was very helpful was we developed a one-page info sheet that had like basically demystified neighboring all in a little one pager. It was a graphic that basically showed, that we can all be neighbors. And neighboring, again, it's not an act, but it's a sense of inclusion. And so we really just wanted to demystify it and make sure people understood, like, no matter who you are, what you do, what capacity you have, you are welcome in this work. So I could talk a long time about this because I really do love it, but I'm gonna stop.
No.
Well, I get myself in trouble there too, because it is an exciting topic.
It is.
I think, and it's something that oftentimes we want to come up with ideas for the other guy to do. But this is really something that me and my family, that we have to do on our own, and that we can. We just have to turn off Netflix and get up off the couch, take a little initiative. We've had but we've had a fantastic time getting to know our neighbors, because we'd gotten lazy and had not connected with new ones that had moved in and didn't really know their names. And Dave Runyon talks about just starting with knowing names makes all the difference.
It does.
And then you as you get acquainted and you build those relationships, you learn about their perspective and how to get along with them, no matter who they voted for, no matter what they look like, right? So it cuts across a lot of these topics. So, and one of the impacts, I think, in Midland is you've seen pretty powerful community response around your flooding that has taken place there. And I'm thinking some of that rallying probably stems back or has roots back in this whole neighboring initiative.
Right. I think, this is really becoming a part of our culture, who we are. That whole, and I think that we I think we've always been a caring community. I think it just helps enhance it even more. And so this program helps us reach areas that we might not be able to reach otherwise. So what you said is right. This is something, I often say to people, are you a citizen of our community, or do you just live here? And which means we all have responsibility. I always wanted to have a neighborhood Christmas party, and I'm thinking, why isn't anybody having a neighborhood Christmas party? I want to go to this party. Then I went, you know what, Maureen? You want a neighborhood party? You better have the neighborhood Christmas party. Why do you think somebody else should do it for you? And it's been a blessing to me in my neighborhood. I know my neighbors. I can walk around the block. I can talk to them. I have a son with autism. He can ride his bike around the block. They all know who he is. It's a great thing. But we all have some responsibility in making things happen. And and it's not that hard, because you don't have to do anything, but you could sit on your front porch and wave at people. That's his first step. Then you could introduce yourself. And then it could become more if you want it to be. So it could be as small or as big as you want it to be.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned the Christmas parties. That reminds me, State Farm did a big neighboring national study in 2015, and
Really?
I'd be glad to send you. I'll be glad to send you the PDF copy of it.
I would like
it's
that.
fascinating. It's fascinating because you have like 75% that say they think it's important for neighbors to get together, but only 10% that have ever actually organized or done something to get neighbors together. And 80% that say it's important for neighbors to interact, but 20%, probably less, that say they even know the names of their neighbors. So it's this, it is this interesting contrast. And you mentioned that it just takes someone being the spark plug, taking the initiative to get some of that going.
Yeah. And for some, and we're all different, where there's introverts, there's extroverts. So, we are all unique. We are all unique. And so we all bring our unique perspective to that. So we can all, support one another in this. And as Alicia said, just be there, and try to, so our project tries to walk alongside of those who want to do something. And we like to take their stories and share them with others. So in fact, I was at a meeting at our local, it's called the Arnold Center, and it's a center where people with disabilities gather. And and they were told me what they did. They had a brand new person who worked there who bought donuts, and they're in like a business area, and took them to all the neighbors and introduced themselves. And they did it for folks inside of their organization. Mm-hmm. So it was really very exciting. So everyone's been sharing. We created a way so people could share what they do, which is really an exciting thing too. So you could get some ideas.
Creating that culture so it spreads to new people in the community and others. Alicia, you mentioned getting people together by Zoom and having these focus groups and talking about Neighboring Week. I don't think I've heard that talked about much in other circles where we've had these discussions. So is that kind of your secret sauce for making this successful?
Yeah. I don't know that we have it all figured out. We definitely don't have it all figured out. We just had a debrief meeting and came up with like 50 new things we want to, try to work differently at next year. But kind of going to, you touched on the flood. I would say though, premeditated to that was just COVID. Our whole world is experiencing a different way of life, and people are seeking connection and eager to maybe consider connection in ways that they might not have been before our world was turned upside down. And so that has been one of the silver linings, is that when we started talking about this, we would have loved to pull people together in person to talk about like, hey, what are people thinking about Neighboring Week? What's going and what's being planned? But we actually then said, I think it worked better that we did a very easy to engage virtual platform to come in connection with our community. It brought about a sense that both you and Maureen have spoken on, that this is not the coalition that's going to tell you what to do or tell you how to engage. This is us sharing with you inclusion work through Neighboring Week. Take it and run with it and do what makes most sense for whoever you deem your neighbor to be. And I think the other part, and Maureen just briefly touched on it, is we had other virtual entities that were coinciding with those meetings. We had a toolkit, we called it, where it was a Google Drive. And we put together a link and we tried to market that link as much as we could to our community to say, here's all the information. And so we had that infographic, but we also had neighboring resources. We had neighboring ideas and activities. And then we also had forms that were uploaded from community members. They would fill out a community form to say, I am the city parks and recs, and this is what we're going to do. We're going to do a scavenger hunt. And so we took that form and uploaded it to this Google form or Google Drive. And then all of the community had access to see this. And I think that's where our opportunity lies for next year, is how do we actually make that more of a living, breathing entity where people kind of create their North Star around, because it allows for community resonance amongst 80,000 people, which you could never do in an in-person meeting platform or things like that. So, yeah.
That's okay. That's a great example then, and sharing those resources freely and widely. Maybe that sounds like maybe part of the secret sauce as well then.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to think of, steps to help other communities replicate.
Well, first,
right?
Go ahead, Alicia.
No, I was just going to say, I would also say that, like, whatever community is looking to engage in this work, where is something like a cultural awareness coalition, or where is the work that's already existing of a like-minded body of people that want to bring about a sense of belonging and improve relationships within community and inclusion? And I don't know many other communities, right? But I have to imagine that some sort of entity like that exists. And so if you can get some buy-in and some shared like excitement around that, I think that is probably more the secret to it, if you will. Because out of those conversations and energy will come things like our graphic and our toolkit and our meetings.
Right. Yeah, so I think too, and I just need to say this again because I think it's an invitation. It's an invitation to be part of something. It says if I say, come to my house, or, please, help us with this, that says, hey, you are worthy. I want to know you better. And I think everyone needs that in some form or another. So we had different things that we did. We had these postcards. You can see it.
Okay, yes.
And people did, yes, so it actually, and we had this that people put in their doors, loving neighbor, if they wanted to, so they could just put that up. Our newspaper took our graphic and printed, I'll show it to you. I'm showing you all this one page in the newspaper. So if you didn't have access, you could get the newspaper, cut that out, and it gave you lots of things about, ideas on what you could do. We had one organization that was making postcards because it was National Postcard. Was it National Postcard Day, Elisa? Yeah. And so they were making these lovely little postcards, and then they took our graphic, kind of shrunk it down, and then they made neighboring postcards, and they even were featured on the National Postcard Day website. Who would have thought? So it said, here's how they're celebrating Postcard Day week. And so it was, just kind of fun things like that.
Well, and all of the things that Maureen just showed you, though, was basically a shared language. We developed a shared language. We didn't tell people how they had to do it, but then people are seeing that graphic in the newspaper, in windows, and then on social media. And we have businesses and nonprofits and people just being able to kind of share Neighboring Week in the same lens. So that way it builds that strength around our community to say, yeah, okay, I didn't really know that this Neighboring Week was the same thing that this nonprofit posted about 2 days ago. It helps just connect all the dots.
Right.
I just think that's really a powerful example of what you pulled off there as a community. I mean, some communities form an identity around festivals that they have. Down here, apple butter making days and heritage days and
Sure.
things. But it sounds like it's kind of taken on that flavor in Michigan, in Midland here, that neighboring week, that this is part of the community identity. This is something we do and we celebrate. And that's sure a good example of getting it to last longer than just maybe the 3 years that you talked about initially. That's going to give it life for a long time.
Sure. And so again, we really hope it just becomes welcoming becomes part of our culture. And so being a good neighbor is, because we all want certain things. We might want to belong to, our sense of belonging is at the gym, our sense of belonging is at the church, our sense of belonging is with my golf team or whatever, but so when we say this, when we talk about welcoming, it comes in, it can come in many different ways, but neighboring, when you say neighboring, that's something that everybody can do. It's just a wave or, or a hello, so it's simple as that. So again, it's that bigger sense of I'm part of something bigger. I belong to this community. I'm a part of it. And that's why you do that. It's not just about neighboring. It is really being a part of something bigger than yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. And at a minimum, learning the names of those immediate neighbors, because that opens up a window of opportunities.
Right.
Lots of different
in
options.
our businesses, we have a wonderful hospital here that has multiple floors, and people on one floor don't necessarily know the people who work on the top floor, know the people who work on the bottom floor. So they did neighboring within their own businesses to meet coworkers, and they, which was a great thing. Someone would put a little sticky note on outside the door. This is my hobby, blah, blah, blah. So if somebody walked by and said, oh, that's my hobby too, so it created something that you could talk about, a way to connect with one another.
Well, these are great examples. Anything else that either one of you want to add before we wrap up here?
Well, there are things out on social media too, besides the stuff we've put out there. So, there's things on Pinterest, people can go out and you can look up through that. Some of the things on hospitality that they do that you can say, oh, I can take that and kind of tweak it to be good for us. And I think that people are really willing to share that because they see the value of what it means to be, a good neighbor.
Well, your community's inspiration to others for sure, and I'm sure hoping that we can use your example to be an inspiration to a lot of communities in Missouri.
Well, thank you. And let me just say, the invitation that you gave us to be interviewed by you was, that was a very heartfelt invitation. Said something that, okay, great. We are proud to be a part of that, to help you with that, as you are helping us, with that too, because I now have this neighboring link in Fort Wayne that I'm going to go look up. And if you would send me that State Farm report, I would love to read that.
I will send you that. And I'll send you an interview that I did with NeighborLink as well.
I'd love that. Thank you.
So I'll turn our record.
All right, we'll bring it into our video there. That's the report from Midland, Michigan, and what they're doing there. A very unique type of situation there in Midland. I think they've really fine-tuned that, and Maureen kind of skipped over it a little bit. I mean, we alluded to it, and I asked, but then, and she kind of gave a general answer, but Midland's a good-sized community, and of course, up in Michigan, a lot of lakes, and they had a dam burst near there and flooded the downtown and flooded neighborhoods that should never be flooded. And really, you can find a few videos online about how neighbors jumped in and helped neighbors and what that looked like. And several other people have talked about how the fact that this neighboring program was already in place really helped facilitate that emergency response, so to speak, from neighbors. Because sometimes, when you have a problem, your neighbors are your first responders. They're right next to you. So a great example on a lot of different levels here today. Now, I realize some of you may have questions that you want to share about that in chat. Of course, you're always welcome to do that. Um, as we kind of wrap up today, we do need your feedback. So, in chat, would you share something that maybe you learned today from Midland, Michigan's interview, or even from our earlier discussion? Share something you learned today and uh, what you're going to think about or maybe actually implement from the report. And again, our neighboring class, this is ongoing, Neighboring 101. It will continue to be a free class. Our next session is actually on December 10th, and we'll be looking at the steps that can be taken to kind of engage a neighborhood and how that impacts social capital. There was a mention of it in this interview, uh, alluded to that, this sort of asset-based community management, community development, what that looks like in a neighborhood, how you develop social capital in a neighborhood. And there's actually a book on that. We'll be talking through some of that. And as I pull things together, either next session or one of the future ones, we'll actually be looking at Edmonton, Canada, uh, where they are really piloting this community asset-based community development in their neighborhoods in Edmonton, Canada. So let's see, we'll look in chat here. If you would, something that you learned today and that you're going to think about or maybe actually try and implement. Anybody want to share something they learned today? Oh, it's an invitation for everyone to contribute to their community. No special training or skills required. Yeah, steps can be big or small. I found the first thing I had to do with neighboring was I had to eat some crow. I have a good friend that says, eat crow while it's young and tender. Well, some of these neighbors who I didn't know their names had been living near me for 3 or 4 years or more. So the crow wasn't exactly young and tender, but I still had to go and knock on doors. And this was pre-COVID, and kind of reintroduce myself and then draw out of them names and things, but say, hey, I want to be a better neighbor, basically. And this is who I am. This is our family. And in the process, when they shared their names, I immediately wrote that down after the door shut. I immediately wrote that down on my chart that I kept on the refrigerator. And that helped me to remember and use their names. So next time when they are out walking, I didn't just say, hey, you, I was able to recall those names from that chart that's on our refrigerator that I was looking at. And so I could actually say, hey, Matt, how are you? And it's not, it takes time, but it's not that big of a jump from, hey, Matt, how are you, to, hey, Matt, would you help me with something in my yard? And then you have conversations from that. Or, hey, Matt, you want to come over and watch the football game today? And, just all sorts of things that stem from that because and use a person's name. It is incredibly powerful. And I couldn't say I was being a good neighbor really when I was saying everyone was my neighbor, because then I just kind of made up whatever neighboring looked like, whatever it was convenient to me. I'd say, oh, I'm neighboring, but yet I didn't know the names of the people living near me, and that's a problem. And certainly that's a big part of community asset-based community development that we'll be learning about. I see some have gained some hope for a bigger buy-in or interest in neighboring projects around the area. Several of you feel you might see opportunities here for uh, programs in your area, how neighbors can get involved. I will, after the meeting, follow up with the link to the recording for those who weren't able to join us, as well as the chat conversations. We'll share those out. And as I dissect through those, that may lead to other neighboring 101 sessions that we have further on down the road. The next 6 are already planned, and hopefully that has been helpful to you. Well, one last poll here I'm going to ask of you. Let's see. One last poll, because we need to have some ratings before you leave today. We need your honest feedback on these Zoom sessions, whether or not you learned something from it today. Overall, how productive do you think this session was for you today? And be honest, these are anonymous, and we want to try and meet your needs. And if there are areas that we can improve, we need to do that. And then I will say, as people are voting, as we wrap up the session or end, I will stay on, but not record. If any of you want to have further discussions about neighboring and some of maybe future topics or some questions that you might have on this idea. Now that you've registered for this class and you're in the loop, you will be getting the reminder emails about future sessions. All right, well, thank you for that input. Looks like it was beneficial to a lot of people, and I was excited to have you here today. And as I mentioned, our next session is on December 10th, and we'll be looking at steps you can take to engage a neighborhood and how that impacts social capital. So until next time, thank you again for joining us for Neighboring 101, and feel free to stay on if you have questions that you'd like to pose or other conversations you'd like to have off the record.